Hello guys, welcome to the second edition of Mind Debates. This is Adit Kapadia coming to you from Houston. With me now Sunanda and Pramod, I'm going to call you the Varisht Patrakar of MyIndMakers.
Did you say worst?
Varisht
I'm
Patrakar,
a
not
South
Vashisht
Indian. You're hoping that I know Hindi.
I'm a Vashisht Patrakar anyway.
Vashisht Patrakar or Varisht Patrakar.
Yeah.
Together with me are Pramod and Sunanda, as usual, from our podcast team. And today we have a very special guest on the second edition of Mind Debates. We have with us Professor Vamsee Juluri, who is a professor of media studies in the University of San Francisco. He did his PhD right here at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and is a scholar in his own right, and is the author of 4 books on a variety of topics, might I add, Professor, on the mythologist, Bollywood nation becoming a global audience, and the last one, which is most in the news and one of my personal favorites, rearming Hinduism. So today we are going to talk to Professor Juluri about rearming Hinduism, clear our doubts, ask some questions, and then kind of have a broad-based debate on Hinduism, the media, and which kind of pertains to his background as well over media studies. So welcome to the Mind Debates, Vamsee. So great to have you today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you, and I'm looking forward to balancing all the equations, Vindhya and verse. Vindhya was a good axis. Yeah, the problem is with the real axes, which is just sleep academia.
That's why, see, we have one north and south, and then they pushed me way to the west. So, so we leave no room for ambiguity. Yeah. So anyways, we'll kickstart the debate. We've got some fascinating responses and questions that we had. But Sunanda had an interesting question, and when me and Sunanda were basically discussing rearming Hinduism offline over the weekend, she brought this up to me, and that made me ponder over a lot of things. So Sunanda, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, welcome to the Mind Debates, Dr. Juluri. We are really happy to have you here. We've been wanting to do this for a long time, so this is my fangirl moment, so to speak. So and congratulations for the wonderful book. Everyone is talking about it. Wherever I go, everyone is talking about it. So you've almost, we can say, set a cat in the pigeons or started a new renaissance. We can say whichever way. When I was reading the book, first thought that came to me was that still now I've read 2 kinds of books. When anything talks about Hinduism, I either read, scriptures, so scriptures that have been set for us, or I read commentaries of those scriptures. Beyond that, there hasn't been anything. So you have actually started a new genre of Hinduism where we are actually talking about a thought, a word, you call it civilizational intelligence. I really want to know what was the basis? Why did you want to write this book? And what made you choose this genre? What made you go away from, commentaries of the scriptures or scriptures themselves and write a modern book about modern day? You're talking about, thousands of years ago civilization.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question, because I did not think 10 or even 20 years ago that I would one day be writing a book called Rearming Hinduism. I grew up in a fairly traditional Hindu household, like many of us. My parents were very devout. I was devout sort of in my own way, but not very given to ritual or ceremony or anything like that, because I was probably from a generation which was growing up on MTV and things. So I guess Hinduism was not a big part of my life. So that was 20 years ago. Now, what happened in the last 10 or 15 years since I became an academic and I began to teach and write about the media, I found myself coming towards Hinduism in a very different way. Very different from many of the Hinduism books that I've read, to which are the kind of books you're talking about, the scriptures, the commentaries on them. And these, the traditional spiritual books, as we might call them, are obviously very, very influential, inspirational for me. But what I began to find increasingly is that there was really no discourse or a very little discourse available about what it meant to live in modern Hinduism. You know, how Hinduism was going to help us make sense of the world we are in and the world that we're going into in the future, the post-colonial, global, highly mediated digital world. And one of the reasons I was looking at it that way was because of my training in media and cultural studies. And in media and cultural studies, essentially what we do is look at the stories we tell ourselves about the world present, you know, in the media, in the popular culture, in the news, and we examine these stories for inaccuracies, myths, distortions, and questions of power. So, for example, when cultural studies began in England in the 1960s and 70s, all that this did was to look at how, you know, the news, for example, told stories between different class groups. Later, a lot of studies done on gender, a lot of studies done on race, and here I was teaching all this very interesting stuff, and nothing in my field about what is going on with Hinduism. Where was the Hindu story? Now, the sad part of this whole thing was there was a Hindu story. Obviously, it was there in academia, it was there in the media and popular culture, it was there in movies like Slumdog Millionaire, the coverage of the Bombay terrorist attacks, all these things. And the Hindu story was totally flawed. So I was driven literally to write this book because of the huge gap that existed between what all of us were going through as a new generation of Hindus trying to make sense of the world in a very modern, universal, compassionate way, and the story about Hinduism that was being manufactured in the media. And this manufactured story, my own colleagues in academia, in the media, were not letting us question, let alone critique. So there was a lot of pain, obviously, that led me to write this book in such a manner.
Yeah, wonderful. I think it is much needed. We really did need this book. You know, as you talk about, I think it's for all generations. It is for the older generation who grew up on scriptures. It is for us who heard scriptures but didn't really read them. Unfortunately, that's not how we were raised. We just heard them or we just read. Most of my scriptural knowledge really came from Amar Chitra Katha, I have to be honest. So from there, or what the stories that my grandmother told me. So here was a dichotomy, a very modern faith, yet straight-jacketed in a very old, ancient clothes. So what I think you have done in sense is you have taken it out, an ancient faith, ancient this thing, and given it a modern version, you know, for younger people to sort of be friendly with it.
And kind of build on that point, Sunanda. Sorry for the technical glitch for about 15 seconds or something. Where
we were wondering where you went. We were wondering where you went.
No, I was behind the scenes. Now I'm back in back again. No, but taking your question forward, and one of my questions for Vamsee was about this, that, you know, what was the inspiration, which you beautifully outlined. But would you also state that the people who are being peddled as Hindu scholars, and I use the word peddle very liberally and deliberately, like say Wendy Doniger or something like that over here, and they have, you know, they've misrepresented Hinduism in a lot of ways over here. So was that also a contributing factor that around you in US you saw a lot of misrepresentations in the mainstream media, educational school books and so forth?
Yes. See, so in my field, in media studies, we're all the time talking about stereotypes, whether it's stereotypes about race, about African Americans or minorities or women and so on. And here was this whole torrent, this deluge of totally bizarre things that were being said about Hindus and Hinduism, and there was no response from academia. And I didn't notice it in a very big way, when I was younger, say when I was in my 20s, maybe because we all grew up with this kind of culture in India that, don't make a big deal about it, it's okay, let people say what they will, Hinduism doesn't need validation, from anybody. So I think I was somewhat indifferent to it. But in the last 15 years or so, I could see that it was becoming more and more intense. Supposedly as a response to Hindu nationalism in India and all these things. But I mean, it was getting to be very, very problematic the way it was emerging. So two things in particular, I think, led me to where I am with this book, and with setting loose the lion god among the pigeons. A cat won't do the job. See, the first thing was the 2006 California textbooks issue.
Right.
And at that time, I read about it in the papers, and the newspapers all said, Hindu extremists are trying to saffronize history in Sacramento and like that. And at first I didn't particularly pay much attention. And then as I started following what was going on closely, in early 2006, it seemed to me that the way this issue was being depicted in the media, in the main academic mailing lists and so on, was completely flawed. I mean, it was very simple. I didn't even realize how absurd the textbooks were. They were stuck in 19th century theories, Orientalist theories, and that kind of stuff would not be permitted for any other community today. And so I was looking at what these textbooks were saying, and they didn't say one thing about Hindu philosophy or culture. It was just some very shallow stuff about Aryans and caste and mocking stuff about Hanuman. And I was starting to follow it very closely, and then what sort of brought me to the tipping point was this letter written by dozens of academics, many of whom I respected, I knew, some of whom I'd studied with and so on. And I just said, let me see how serious academia is about respecting free speech and debate. So I wrote an op-ed basically supporting the Hindu community's side, which was published in the San Francisco Chronicle in opposition to Professors Thapar and Witzel. And
by
that's
Thapar,
sort
you
of...
mean Professor Romila Thapar, right? Because she's the favorite.
Yeah, Professor Romila Thapar and Professor Witzel. Well, I mean, I did my little bit there, but unfortunately, things didn't change in California. And then over the years, I began to pay more attention to what was going on, and naturally, I was hearing different things from different constituencies. Some people would say, "Good, you're speaking out against us." Some people would say, "What are you doing, taking side with extremists?" And so I, played it a bit cautiously. I wanted to see each issue and examine it for myself. And over the years, I could see that, the Hindu community wasn't, full of crazy extremist fundamentalists the way we were being, made out to be. And in academia, for me to say that was not an easy thing, because that consensus in academia is so strong today that what you and I consider normal, mainstream, peaceful, philosophical Hinduism is to them extremism and Hindutva. And what is liberal Hinduism according to them, which may or may not exist, as you know, is their fantasy about what a liberal secular Hindu has to be. And the worst, manifestation of this kind of, I'll call it insanity, was the controversy that erupted here about Wendy Doniger's The Hindus, an alternative history.
And we'll come to that. We'll come to that specifically. Pramod has this good, fascinating question about that Hindu phobia. But before we get on to that, I wanted to just bring Pramod and Sunanda into this debate. Like when you talk about this loosely termed that saffronization of history, which is which in effect, if you disagree with Ms. Thapar and Mr. Habib and others, you are basically rebranded as, I don't know, extremists, and you can have a different point of view. But
no, you are branded as illiterate extremists. I would be happy with extremists. They also call you illiterate. So that sort of gets.
And I wrote this, if you remember, I wrote this piece about the HRD ministry, Sunanda, on MyIndMakers, and I called their institutions as ideological fiefdoms. So I think, and Vamsee would agree with me that there are ideological fiefdoms. If you
and
have
what Prof Juluri has done, that he has actually stormed into the bastions. Some bastions he has stormed.
Exactly. So Pramod, what do you think about
that? From what I'm picking up, there's a lot of ripples, Dr. Juluri.
Absolutely.
I think the amazing chronicalization, I think the intelligence you talked about, and that is the heart and soul of the book, and kind of does recur in a very remote way in each of your books. You're kind of leading up to it, and Rearming Hinduism kind of becomes one of the seminal works, if you will. I want to come back to the confluence of events, because I'm a political analyst. I would like to understand. You're talking a little bit about the Hindu phobia. Was there also a confluence of increased immigration into the United States by people of Indian origin, and adding up to the influence that the Indian community was gaining in mainstream America? Was that the reason for increased Hindu phobia? Hence, that also went into the academic world in a much more vociferous manner. Did you see that happening in the 90s and the early 2000s? You did tie it into the rise into Hindu nationalism a little bit after the 80s. But what was there a confluence of so many different reasons for that? For the Hindu phobia to...
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it does seem like it was post Y2K that things got really ugly.
Yeah.
And first they take the number 0, then they get us to repair it, and then they call us names. How about that? You know? So, no, seriously though, I'll tell you what the problem is. I mean, see, I very much studied within the ideological fiefdom, if you want to call it that. You know, I mean, I studied in Amherst, and I appreciated the many good things that exist in the mainstream academic paradigm. You know, that is what changing the world, or paying attention to issues of inequality, injustice, all these things. Now, where the disagreement came about for me was that while academia, or leftist academia, or liberal academia, the progressive academic world, was expanding to include progressive Islamic voices, progressive feminist voices, all things, they just shut the doors on us. You know, they totally made it seem like being Hindu was totally about being, fundamentalist and conservative and so on. You know, they could not accommodate people like many of us who are fairly, socially liberal, culturally also very fairly open-minded. I mean, and but they somehow make it seem like, who we are is antithetical to liberalism. And see, I think there are many layers to it, in terms of where this Hindu phobia is coming from. In my book, I talk about one part of it, which is that Hindu phobia is essentially the old racist, colonial, orientalist story, which did not get decolonized in academia. Right? Till the 60s, there was, equivalent of Hindu phobia for virtually every community. Every non-white, non-European community was depicted badly in Western academia. Now, in the 60s and 70s, most other communities got a voice in academia. And for us, for various reasons, it didn't happen. We didn't have the numbers in the US. We've been immigrants. Culturally, those of us who were here, were brought up in this Nehruvian era where we were told not to rock the boat. And on top of it, our own intellectuals from that time, the Nehruvian intellectuals, were simply disconnected. They didn't understand, I think, what Rama and Krishna and Ganesha and all meant to us, And so there were all these reasons, I think historically for why, Hindu phobia was allowed to proliferate.
Yeah.
And what you say is an interesting new question. So post 98, 99, obviously, the first BJP government, the nuclear tests, the economic boom, the coming of, the whole software engineer community. I think all of these things probably did knock the old stereotypes they had about, the passive Hindu.
Right.
And that got replaced by suddenly this new stereotype about the aggressive, militant, Hindutva Hindu.
Correct. And I think you were when you were narrating each aspects of how that political change later on, the immigration that slowly started seeping in. Again, that immigration was predominantly focused on science and technology. That is you never had a wave of, let us say, right of center intellectual base that ever wanted to seek opportunities here. You never had, let's say, an orphaned JNU librarian come to and be a librarian here. You always had that the vestiges of the immigration that happened in the 80s and 90s was essentially towards seeking a better economic opportunity. It never had the sort of the kind of be it from the BJP government itself. You never had the kind of political influence that was needed to be established. So I see that you're coming close to understanding, making people understand that the Hindu phobia was also a kind of culmination of several things that started politically over in India. So I wanted to talk to you about that a little bit, but Adit, do you want Sunanda to move forward?
Yes, Sunanda. So you had a question, yes, on it.
Yeah, I have when we were talking about Hindu phobia and the self-loathing and that is just that comes so naturally to us. You did say, and when in the introduction of this, that you grew up in a family, you grew up in a Hindu family, but you were not quite so Hindu, which is true for all of us. I grew up in a very Hindu traditional family, but I did not, as I said, I grew up on Amar Chitra Katha and all that. So being Hindu was not such a strong part of me. What happened in the later part was that all the depiction that I see of Puranic stories on the TV, in the media, everywhere. Suddenly, Ravan is somebody with 10 heads, which he is, but nobody is talking to you about what those 10 heads are. Ganesha is all about eating laddus or running on the thing. Similarly, Hanuman is all about running around and prancing around like a monkey. Nobody wanted to go beyond, beyond those Puranic stories or beyond what it meant. So a lot of children grow up on this even today. And do you see a problem with that, with the depiction of this in popular culture, with the depiction of Hinduism in the popular culture? Because a lot of people say, well, this is the way to popularize it. But then I have a problem that if you are going to popularize it this way, it doesn't really give it the kind of sanctity that it should. What do you think about that?
Wonderful. Well, you use the word that I would have used here, which is sanctity.
Yeah.
That is a key concept here. See, I think what happened is I look at it in generational terms very simply. And again, I'm interested in a generational understanding because my first book was on MTV, and I realized a lot of social and cultural phenomena and political analysis gets enriched when you simply look at what's going on in terms of 2 or 3 generations and how they interact. And we are kind of, passing on a Hinduism which was given to us as a colonial survivor religion. Right? Many of our parents and grandparents basically grew up when India was a British colony, or at least their childhood was essentially about surviving, crazy people who totally hated your culture and everything you stood for. But you had to humor them so that they would leave you alone. And it was a great success. I mean, we are the only country which kept its religion in a big way. So somehow,
and you say that in the book that we survived, that it's a big thing that we did survive.
Yeah. I mean, now that I think about it, we didn't, I don't know, when we were, I think, see, that's how much we believed in our gods. We never took credit. We just said our gods protected us, whatever. Or we didn't even see it as a danger. But, I mean, it was a pretty, when you look at the last 300-400 years of history, and this is something my, leftist kind of education taught me. This is what I find funny in the leftist academia. The very things they talk about when it comes to Hindus, they suddenly stop talking about it, like colonialism and what it...
Yeah.
Anyway, so so when I was growing up, there was that complete absence of an intelligent, modern narrative or discourse reflecting Hinduism, right? I mean, we went to the temples, we prayed, our parents... I mean, the only thing I can think about Hinduism when I was a child was this idea of muddy, the idea of, not touching somebody, when you're in the puja room in your prayer clothes, taking a bath, all these ideas of purity and orthodox.
For me, it was getting prasad. I used to wait and get prasad. I'm ashamed to say that, but that's a fact.
No, but we have to tell this, that that we have Fred Stella, who wrote this piece on how he became a Hindu. Now, he was born, he's an American who lives in Michigan, and he wrote this wonderful thing that if anything, you should definitely come to a temple for the prasad. It's like the slogan for Hinduism should be, come but don't go back hungry.
Very nice. Very nice. See, I'll tell you, that has actually been the saving grace, because at the end of the day, Hinduism was fundamentally about being happy. Right? It was about prasad, it was about the bhajans, it was about beautiful decorations for the gods. I mean, even every puja was about doing something fun. Like my favorite activity during Vinayak Chaturthi was to kind of, grind the sandalwood thing and make the sandalwood paste. And so, I mean, everything we did was, very fun, it was nice, it was harmless fun. Now, the thing about the media is this. To a large extent, I would give a lot of credit to Amar Chitrikada because it gave us a slightly modern idiom for understanding all these stories. At least we know what these stories are thanks to Chitrikadas. And of course, down south, I think south of the Vindhyas, you know who saved Hinduism? It was N.T. Ramarao. So,
N.T. Ramarao.
yeah.
You find both the people from South India speaking in chorus when it comes to.
So, no, we have to give credit because, oh, by the way, little aside, around 2006 when this textbook stuff took place, I wanted to write a book called Cinema of the Gods. I wanted to do a study about Telugu mythological cinema, and I interviewed a lot of stalwarts from the film industry, and no academic publisher wanted to take it. So,
that's a sad thing.
Yeah. So, because I was not saying what I guess academia thought I had to be said.
Yeah.
But to come back to the media,
but you should have gone to a production house. Maybe they would have gone into publishing.
Yeah, I think this what is happening with media and Hinduism today. Till the 90s, I think it played a very important role. Both Amar Chitrikada, the movies of NTR and in South India, then even the 80s TV series and all those things. Post 90s, there's obviously been a glut.
Yeah.
Right? There's been a huge boom. There's thousands of DVDs and YouTube made.
But all of them very bad quality.
Yeah, see, that is the challenge. I think the quality is very insistent, and I'll tell you. So one of the things that I think parents can do is, if you're watching the stuff with children, learn to be a critical media consumer. Don't force it all and say, hey, this is Hinduism, you better learn it, which I know some of us do. And that is going to be a problem, because then they're going to say, oh, why is it different from the violence of other communities or cultures? And there's so much bloodshed in all these new animation DVDs.
Yes.
So I think, being a little more critical and understanding that ultimately, you can't contemporize Hanuman and Krishna or Bhim or all these characters beyond a point, because at the end of the day, they're not just characters, but they are our gods, right?
Yeah.
Well, regardless, and I mean, this is what I was talking to Pramod and Sunanda, that this is as much about talking about Indic civilization or something, the book, more than religion. Now, I'm a practicing Jain, and Hinduism and Jainism are very close to each other in a lot of aspects or some, and we have some fascinating debates, me and Pramod especially, about this. But still, I found the book, and this is what I said, that even whether you are adhering to Hindu faiths or not, this book is a must-read just to tell you what it tells about the Indic civilization. So, and that's what I wanted to. Did you observe that as well? That a debate about Hinduism is as much a debate about India's civilization, in fact, more than the religion itself.
Very true. See, that's why I think that's why probably I ended up with this idea that, to me, Hinduism is really about intelligence. It's about a particular way of understanding the world, because I can't find it, because Hinduism is just not codified in the way the more the infant. Yeah. So it's and I think the cross fertilization that has taken place between Hinduism and Jainism, or across North Indian and Southern Hinduism. I mean, it's just incredible. We are the original pluralistic, diverse, non-hierarchical culture that now the Western world wants to educate us and make us become. That's who we were from the beginning.
Yeah. I have an interesting question. Since you and I are South Indians.
I was going to come to you on a lighter note, because people have been accusing me and Sunanda of pulling an Arnab Goswami on you.
Yeah.
Don't count me in there. Don't count me in. You are the boss of the show.
No, you are a bigger accused. I mean, you are accused more than I am in this one. As you always say, I'm the younger one, and I'm never wrong. So, but before you come to that question, before we come to Pramod's question, I think I want to take this question, which was sent to us by one of our listeners or of our podcast or our viewers. And it was on, and I think you were copied on it as well, Professor Juluri, on Twitter. And it was a fascinating idea that a lot of, one of the critiques is that or at least she feels, that Indian academic life hardly affects on a practical field. How do we change that aspect? This was given to us by Simon, who is an avid reader of MyIndMakers. And another part of our question is that current media narratives are completely negative. Do we have any other media alternatives for rural India? Like, how social media has played a big difference in the urban India or something for rural India. So since you are a professor of media studies, how would you answer? One your author hat on and the other your professor hat on. How would you answer those questions?
Yeah, no, that was a great question from Simon. See, the first part is I'm so glad. See, asking the right question means half the battle has been won. And one of the big challenges we had, I think, in India was we never even stopped to ask about the relevance or importance of the humanities and social sciences, because we were so caught up, both for economic reasons and also, I think, for cultural reasons, with the whole engineering, medicine fervor. We never really took the other subjects so seriously. And one of the mistakes I think we made, to connect this with the whole earlier thing about immigrants to the US, a lot of us who came to the US also failed to recognize that in the US, the social sciences and humanities are very influential, unlike in the US. Unlike in India.
Like in India, right.
Yeah, because, here social scientists say things which affect policy. In 1920, the immigration the restriction quotas, all of these took place because in partnership or in collusion with academia. And to this day, academia is very influential in the US. So same thing. We think that as a community, we have professors in engineering and business, and we're all fine. But no professor of engineering will be called to refute a claim made by a professor of Hinduism on Hinduism. So we don't have people in here. Now, in India, I'll tell you what the problem is. I think in India, the problem is we've been so caught up with trying to catch up with the West. We completely forgot that these subjects are important too, right? I won't name names, but even the most dynamic political leaders in India a few years ago, I'll give you a hint, South India, were very big on computers and business and all these things, but they totally neglected the whole cultural side of what a government is supposed to do, encourage the culture of the people and things like that.
I did not take names. That might not work. We have to push you now to take some names.
No, I'm okay. I'll tell you the name of a place. I'll tell you my beloved hometown of Hyderabad. Just boomed, right? The late 90s and early 2000s. We had the high-tech city and everything, and but then there was no effort really being made about encouraging the cultural or intellectual side of it. I'm not blaming anybody for this, but this was the problem with our general middle-class culture in India, and it showed even with the more middle-class friendly, IT-friendly political leaders that we got. It showed because nobody was taking these subjects seriously. I think one thing that the social media is starting to do, I'm not saying it's happened yet, but just the fact that in the last 5-10 years, so much of this new alternative additive has started to gain ground in the blogs, on podcasts, and so on. It is starting to challenge the mainstream. But I think it's very important to realize that this is only step one. What is going on over here? All the very talented people who are doing this entirely out of passion also need to start engaging with mainstream academia in some form. And so I won't name past names and I won't name present names, but I think the present government, which does represent a constituency of cultural change in India, not extremism or anything like that, but it represents people like who are listening to this show, who want a better narrative.
And I think this government has a mandate as well.
Yeah, Pramod, you had a point?
The ripple effect that it has had into the two South Indian states now, in which the Telugu people are unfortunately divided right now, is that Jaggi Vasudev was the top invitee for the swearing in for both for the state of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. He is on a roll going on giving these sessions to the Indian Administrative Service officers. Instead of having some IIM guru or a tech returned from the United States, this was the first session that took place both in Andhra and Telangana. So they kind of slowly yet surely into the south of India, as the kind of indoctrination you North Indians have given us, Sunandaji. What have you given us?
You will never praise us West, although we gave you the PM yaar for our city. Kya we
God gave all the people till now.
I know, and that is why we have to clean up all the mess, no?
Yeah. and we name Moji's very favorite PV Narasimha Rao, because he was Delhi, he had become of Delhi, he had stayed in Delhi for so long. So we claim him as well.
PV Narasimha, yeah. Go ahead, Vamsee. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, speaking of about PV Narasimha Rao Garu, the interesting thing about South Indians, or at least Andhras, is Andhras manage to make their mark on the world only when they leave Andhra.
Yeah.
PV Narasimha Rao.
Yeah, so we had to claim him for him to become the Prime Minister of India.
Yes, yes.
We're probably talking from the two unofficial capitals of Andhra Pradesh in US, Texas and California, or to be precise, San Francisco and Houston. So, anyways, Pramod.
I thought you were going to say Nagpur and Delhi.
Now, I had a question coming back into the language part of it. Professor Juluri, how much of the Renaissance, as part of this rearming Hinduism, has to also take place in linguistics, because that is subject of that is an integral part of the cultural debate for the longest time. I know there is Indologists who have always talked about whether there has been Sanskrit loan words into Dravidian languages, or whether this whole debate about language and culture and how intrinsically they are connected to each other. Could you talk a little bit about that? I'm very interested to know that.
Okay, I'll speak broadly about language, and rather than specifically about the field of linguistics. Yeah. As somebody who's wearing these two hats, as you mentioned, a media studies academic hat and a writer's hat, and I think one of the reasons why this book has struck a chord with people is because it is a writer's book. It's not just an academic book. I mean, it's informed by academic thought, but it's a writer's book which is connecting directly to each reader through the medium of language. And I think this is where a lot of work has to be done by us, because much of what is going on in the right-wing alternative, social media universe suffers from sometimes a lack of respect for the power of language. Okay,
that is beautiful.
Yeah, to put it politely, I mean, it's an uphill task for us, because the fiefdoms are already there. Yeah. The secular intellectual fiefdom can get away with anything because it's been there for 40, 50 years, and it has an advantage over, it doesn't have an advantage in terms of good intentions, but it has an advantage in terms of advertising those good intentions, right? More often than not, anybody who critiques them ends up sounding very angry and militant and what was it, like uneducated, illiterate, right? So I think that has to change. So in a way, what we need to be doing is to professionalize, and by professionalizing, one of the things we need to do is to start respecting language the way Indic civilization traditionally did. We had a goddess of speech, and let's just go back there. And that also, I think, will help us address the other problem which you mentioned earlier, which was from the listener's question about the rural enlightenment. One of the interesting things that's happened was, Hinduism didn't collapse either during colonialism or in the Nehruvian era to a large extent because the earthy Indic Hindu grassroots way of seeing the world was kept alive in the popular culture. It was kept alive in the cinema. And it was kept alive. I'm not romanticizing village life or anything, but I think Indian cinema played a very important role till the 60s or 70s in keeping alive our Hinduism in popular culture, because academia didn't do it, the intellectuals didn't do it, our school books didn't do it. It was only popular culture which kept Hinduism alive, and cinema played a good role at that time. Post 80s, post 90s, downhill in some very important ways. So I think what needs to happen is, first, let's take an interest in language, take an interest in all these subjects and start engaging academia on its terms. We can't do it anymore as amateurs, right? So eventually we'll be able to get to linguistics, the Aryan theory, and all this stuff, and change it.
No, and entering the last phase. Sorry to cut you there, Sunil, but I wanted to wrap up this last question before we go into the brief last debate in the last phase. And this can kind of lead into the debate. This was also asked by one of our listeners, Pradeep, but it was also my question, kind of, that it was about Hinduism and scientific thought. That I think Hinduism or Indic civilization. I read a lot of Jain texts. I read a lot of Hindu texts. Have encouraged scientific thoughts. They're based on scientific principles, and many of these heathens there would be defined as progressivism right now. But we've always been progressive. Right. So to call, say, these are culturally backward and not stuck in the past, I think it probably reflects a narrow understanding of the religion as well.
No, because in India, in Indic civilization, taking from what Adit said, the rishis were scientists, men of religion were men of science as well. This has not happened anywhere else. Men of religion being the men of science. West does not understand this concept because the church, always you have this, obviously you have the Copernicus thing and you have the Galileo thing. Those things did not happen in Indic civilization because, as I said, men of religion were men of science. There was no dichotomy between religion and science at all.
And I think what you're referring to, Sunanda, is also the conflict that existed between religion and science in the, say, 1500s or 1400s in Europe when Galileo, Copernicus and the others were there.
When they say the conflict between religion and science, I think that idea has been borrowed from the West by the leftists in the Indian milieu. It does not suit us.
Absolutely.
It does not suit us. This is Gyan and Vigyan, as we always say, go together in India, have always gone together in India. So they have borrowed this fault line from the West, and then suddenly they say that, oh, there is superstition, there is things which never existed in Indic thought.
Before we go to Professor Pramod, if you had anything to add on to this or something, what was your perspective on this?
No, I think modern science, I wanted to, that was a different question of mine, and Dr. Juluri might take a while to address that question in a subsequent book. This is an idea for you, is to explore if modern science is an ally for rearming Hinduism, or do we feel intellectually downtrodden when it comes to talking about Gyan and Vigyan, like Sunandaji was talking about.
Intellectually downtrodden leads to the same self-loathing thing that we were talking about.
No, that is okay. So I wanted Dr. Juluri to talk about modern science and how that kind of embeds into this whole philosophy of rearming Hinduism. How the modern science of the Western world are not being preeminent in the in technology or science. Does that get in the way of having a discussion on equal footing?
Wow, that's a challenging question to ask somebody who's not a scientist. I'll just give you a few thoughts. See, the way I see it, I think a lot of our present limitations in understanding Indian history or the place of science and religion, or the so-called distinction between science and religion, has a lot to do with the templates that were given to us during colonialism and in the post-colonial Nehruvian era, where the standard narrative we were all given basically is that, the past is about superstition and myth and being ignorant, and the future is about progress. And the idea was that the whole world was ignorant and in the dark ages, and then Europe had its beautiful flowering of reason and science, and then it gave it to everyone in the world as a gift, and now we're also trying to do it. So that is that is the typical narrative we grew up in. I was growing up in the 70s. That was the idea most of us had in school, because it was very simple. World history basically meant Greece, and then Renaissance, Greece. India was just like a footnote in the world. And now what has happened now is, in a way, we are trying to fight that, but we're also trying, I think, in some ways, overcompensate. So we end up jumping to all sorts of awkward, poorly worded ideas about, whether it's about Pushpak Viman or plastic surgery in the past, things like that. And that, again, that just offers ammunition for us to be ridiculed. And more important. talk
And
about.
that takes away also from some of the genuine achievements. You see, Pythagoras'
Right.
theorem was like, there is scientific proof of them, there is Sushrutra's accomplishments and stuff, and then they try to batch all of this that अरे ये तो सब ऐसे ही बकवास करते हैं, So
Yeah, a, a, a lot of knowledge, and in fact, I mean, science itself may be a little beyond my scope for a future book. But one of the things I do want to talk about in a future book is basically the place of India in world history, and that has been completely obfuscated. I mean, we are at least talking about some certain scientific concepts and how they went there. See, what happened is because the Islamic, Arabic countries got into academia and history and humanities in a big way long before us. They have moved the narrative, decolonized the narrative from the Eurocentric position it was in to a more favorable Islamocentric position. I'm not saying it's wrong. All I'm saying is it's only half the story. Right? I mean, so now you have the economists writing articles saying, oh, you know that there was this Arab scientist who foresaw evolution before Darwin. And then, oh, by the way, recently there was an article, I think it was in The Economist, I shared it on Facebook, talking about this Arab scientist who actually flew. and now when they say it, it's all like, wow, it's alternative history. And when we say it, we are Hindutva, oddball.
Now that has taken the shape, Dr. Juluri, of the alien theorists who now insinuate that these were aliens, the gods were aliens.
The alien stuff is just nuts. Yeah, see, so that's a problem. Again, we have this, a lot of people, even in our own community, who get carried away by, stuff like this. Too much of science and not enough of the humanities in their thinking.
Yeah.
No, I mean, see, it's very.
I think what Pramod also meant more than science was scientific thought, I think. That always prevailed.
Yeah, no, I think, see, it was there. The whatever little I try to understand about, Shankara and Madhva and, the great thinkers, I mean, it was astounding. The depth there, you need so much training, you need a lifetime work to grasp it. And none of them. Hello?
Yeah, you were saying something? Yeah.
I said amazing depth you need when you read some of these bhashyas or commentaries by Shankara, or it would take several lifetimes to understand.
And we do miss the debates that used to happen, very, very good interfaith debates that they used to happen in the earlier times. So anyways, by the way, on a lighter note, I have to tell you, this might be a little odd where we are not shouting over each other over here, Vamsee. When we did the first Mind debate, people were telling, "Arey yaar, aap to yaar news channel ki tarah chillate hi nahi ho." I was like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I couldn't understand.
No, we don't speak here. But I do want to, Adit, I want to get your permission to say one small thing to Dr. Juluri, which struck me when I read his book. Right at the beginning, we have all grown up saying Gayatri Mantra. I don't even remember when I learned it. We all learned Gayatri Mantra. And when you were talking about this civilizational intelligence or Hindu intelligence or Sanatana Dharma intelligence, it just made my eyes moist when you said that even then we were not asking the sun god for a good kill in the hunt, or we were not asking him to eliminate our enemies. We were not asking for any kind of favors. What we were seeking was intelligence. Even at that time, even then, Gayatri Mantra is probably 2,000 years old. So in Rigved, if I'm not mistaken. And I have grown up saying Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha, all my life, and suddenly this made my eyes moist, that it opens a whole new world of how we look at our thinkers and how modern they were. I mean, there is nothing to be ashamed of it. Which tells me, I wish people knew about it and this self-loathing would disappear, because there is nothing to loathe.
Before you answer that question, because we are running, time is of the essence and we're running kind of short on time. We also would like to broaden up in the very last segment, the last 5 minutes, about how to take this debate forward, or what is the future of it. We've debated the past, we've debated the present, but what about the future? So, you can answer Sunanda's question kind of leading on to the last segment of the debate.
Yeah, I think see the future really is about not just rediscovering the past, but understanding the present fully. You know, there's a chapter in part of the book called Teacher, which is sort of my impressionistic and humble, tribute to the Bhagavad Gita. For me, the way I think we need to take the message of the Gita now, for example, is to look at every moment, every life as an individual Kurukshetra, where there is this huge dilemma that each of us faces in even in our most minute actions, whether a particular action is going to be in the cause of dharma or adharma. You know, and I gave some very mundane examples like eating junk food or watching some trash on TV. You know, I mean something as simple as that, because most of us luckily are not in this position of standing in a battlefield like Arjuna, but we are forced to be Arjunas every moment in just deciding simple things in our lives. You know, what we want to be, what we want to say next, what we want to type on the social media, who we want to be friends with, whose arguments we want to reject. So at a very personal level, I think we have to start viewing the world as a result of choices we're going to have to make ethically. And for that, I think, so that is one part of it. Now, it's very essential to get a better understanding of our culture and civilization in order to do this. And one way of doing it, I think, like you said, Surinder, is just going with the bhavas. You know, we are hardwired to appreciate the wisdom in our thought. You know, I mean, it happens to us. Even when we read Amar Chitragada, we feel Krishna sometimes, and not to, shy away or not try to over-rationalize who the gods were, but go with, that particular feelings they evoke in us, the feelings which drive us to right action individually and socially. So I think in practical terms, the future really has to be about being very, very dedicated to what we're all trying to do here, whether it's, like this podcast or what we're doing, because for the next generation, it's very, very essential. And obviously, the whole premise of my book is that we are doing this not just because we are narcissists or we want to feel good about our religion, but because we need to give direction to the world. I mean, I think world thinking has seriously collapsed. And if there is still some positive thinking in the world today, whether it is about the environment or animal rights, or even secularism, let's face it, it came from the West's encounter with us.
So in the end, the essence is kahan the, kahan hai, aur kahan jayenge. Just about that. So Pramod, yes. Any closing comments before we wrap up?
No, I want to understand why Dr. Juluri let go of his detachment to write this book. Is he attached to rearming Hinduism? Or are you detached to rearming Hinduism?
That's a good
Pramod
one.
is profound as usual.
Okay, you have to come out of a shell to talk about it. You in fact mentioned that in the book as well. I'm very intrigued by the philosophical. This book is multi-layered. I can't talk about it enough. I know we are short on time. You've hit upon several different aspects of Sanatan Dharma. So I want to see what your philosophy is in terms of detachment.
Okay,
yeah.
See, I'll give you a simple example, because I think at an individual level, it's good to be detached in the sense, do your best and don't crave for results, let go, all these things are fine. It's a good stress buster to be that way, let me put it that way. But one of the challenges and crises historically and politically is that too much detachment can just mean letting go, right? And this is a problem, I think, with the Hinduism of our parents and grandparents' generation. I'm not blaming them. They did the best they could under very difficult circumstances. But this was the problem with Gandhi. This was the problem with many people of my father's generation, a certain recent prime minister, as people who are, there is a model of personality in Indian culture. Yeah. People who are very upright, very decent, very good people, very dharmic. But then what happens is because they and don't want to put their foot down, their detachment, their being apolitical, ends up becoming used by adharmic political forces. I mean, you can see it in politics, you can see it in our lives. So what I'm saying is, I think we've reached a point where younger Hindus have to understand that if we continue to just say detached, anything is fine, everything is just Maya, end up getting co-opted into a profoundly adharmic status quo. I know I may sound very progressive for saying it, but that is the we have to understand.
Not doing anything is as good as doing evil, because the first thing my professor in my first class here in UT San Antonio told me, if you can't talk about it, it means you don't have anything to talk about. And you'll be construed as somebody who doesn't know the knowledge the subject enough to talk about it. And I think you have done an amazing job by coming out swinging in a very, very peaceful manner.
and what you said, Pramod, you've quoted like a summary of my favorite quote from Dante Alighieri, that the darkest places in hell are reserved for those who keep our neutrality in times of crisis.
Yeah.
And to some extent, there is a time of crisis right now, as I said, and but we are coming through the crisis, as you said, May 2014 was probably only a beginning, or we'd hit rock bottom, and the journey upwards is not going to be that easy, but it started probably.
Yeah.
But we do need a lot of people to talk about it, to write about it, to feel happy about it, and not get into this shell, as you said. How does it matter? My faith is going to be there forever. How does it matter? So we do need to talk about ourselves.
No, I am going to tell Professor Juluri to write as many columns as possible. We need more voices like you to be heard by all the right people.
Thank you. And there is one thing I'm getting increasingly attached to. Shall I tell you what that is?
Yes, please.
I can't be detached about it. I am very attached to the prospect that there are going to be many bright, young, public intellectuals and concerned citizens of the world, and deeply invested Hindus and Indians and human beings like yourself who are going to take this forward. I'm attached to that.
That's very kind.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Wonderful. But we've had a fascinating debate. I mean, we started with talking about the book, and we took it to a broad-based debate. Also talked about the past, where we came from, where we are going. So I think we managed to cover quite a lot. As it goes, there is not enough time to talk about Hinduism, and there is definitely not enough time to talk about rearming Hinduism.
But I do want to say, I don't think anybody who's watching this right now or will watch this later would not have bought the book. But I want to tell everyone, if you haven't read Rearming Hinduism, this is the first thing you need to do. Go buy yourself a book and do yourself a favor.
If you have a copy of the book right now with you, Professor, and if you want to just put it up to the screen, that will be great. And unless Professor wants to say कि भाई जो थी उनकी भी थी वो भी, that's also sold out now.
Has your copy also sold out?
No, okay.
There is a book, and I would like everyone to buy it. Dr. Juluri still has one copy left.
By the way, I thank everybody who's reading this book and taking it seriously. You know why? Because this book has just gone into the third printing.
Yes, that's wonderful. Congratulations, congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. No, and everybody, this is I don't know. This is a book that the gods wrote. And I just clung to their feet and tried not to mess it up. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely. Well, but that brings us to the end of this fascinating session with Professor Juluri. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Pramod and Sunanda, for being there as usual. And we hope to bring you more of these, and we're probably going to take a promise from Professor Juluri that we are seeing you very soon back on MyIndMakers, either on the debates or on the Mind podcasts. There is a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So on that note, do visit www.mind.net. Please follow us on Twitter at MyIndMakers, and please like our Facebook page. Do keep writing to us. Please, we would love your feedback and comments, and do keep reading the wonderful articles, and do read Rearming Hinduism if you get a chance. Thank you. This is Adit Kapadia signing off.